Well, our next speaker is not going to be here today, so we have a little bit of time, and I can go slowly and have a little fun. However, it's not a fun kind of talk. The title of the talk is Attunement, and it's going to be very little on Scripture today, and it's going to be more on Rosicrucian philosophy, experiential Rosicrucian philosophy, which means it's going to be tedious. So yesterday we talked about pain. Today we will experience pain. What? This is on. This is on. It was only partially on. Are you getting it now? Everything clear now? Okay.
Did Mercury go direct yet?
No. It doesn't go direct until the review is over. Sometimes polar contrasts bring us into an awareness of a very large picture. And sometimes it brings us into awareness of how sharply things are differentiated from each other. For example, in the Bible, we're told the story of Babel, how languages developed and confusion ensued so that people couldn't understand each other. At the other end of that pole, at the redeemed end of that pole, the Rosicrucian cosmoconception tells us that some people, the adepts, have developed the ability to form pictures in their consciousness so clearly that when they speak, other people see the pictures inside of them. And so there is no ambiguity at all, so that people are seeing the same thing. Until we get to the point where we have that picture consciousness, there's a likelihood of a lot of misunderstanding. And not all of the misunderstandings are because we speak different languages. Sometimes within the same language, words mean something different. And a very good example of this is the word hearing. In the Eleusinian Mysteries and the Gospel of St. John, hearing means something very different. For about 1,000 years, the mysteries were celebrated in Eleusis, which is a little town that used to be outside of Athens. And by now it's well incorporated into the city. The Eleusinian Mysteries were quite remarkable in several ways. They were celebrated publicly and privately at the same time. They were like a public festival, but the people who were being initiated, at the same time that they were living out the rites, they were experiencing it on a higher level, and it was quite a phenomenon for them. The Eleusinian Mysteries were based on a mystery myth, the myth of Demeter and Persephone, which is the forerunner to the Christ myth because it has to do with the earth going to sleep and coming back awake, and the spirit being called out of the earth to bring life back to its fullness. It's very similar to another mystery myth, the myth of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, which was current at about the same time, that people were initiated, some people into both rites. And the myth of Isis and Osiris was much more prevalent because Isis made its way all the way up into Germany and into Switzerland. And to celebrate the divine feminine in the person of Isis, they carried huge boats up mountains in Switzerland, and in the boats were the image of Isis. So they were really devoted. The ceremonies, in fact, our word ceremonies comes from the Eleusinian mysteries because the Roman name for Demeter is Ceres. It's where our word cereal comes from, breakfast cereal, because she was the grain goddess. And ceremony meant the living out of the myth. They were carried on over 9 days, and each part of the ceremony brought out a different part of the myth and a different part in the character of the candidates for initiation. Over the 1,000 years that the Eleusinian mysteries existed, they were indeed character building. There is no historian that maligns the mysteries at all, because everybody who participated in the mysteries deeply became a person of better and stronger character. Everybody was morally uplifted. Everybody lived in a way that was more pro-society. In the Eleusinian mysteries, there were greater and lesser mysteries, but even that meant something different. The lesser mysteries were only sacred to Persephone, or Chloe, as she was called at that time, and they were celebrated once a year. And they were celebrated originally for Heracles. Heracles was not an Athenian, and in order to participate in the mysteries, he had to be adopted. And in order to be adopted, he had to be purified. And so the mysteries of the lesser mysteries of Chloe were celebrated once a year in a little town called Agra, and you spent an entire year purifying yourself, and then you could go into the greater mysteries. In the greater mysteries, there were 2 levels. And the people who belonged or who were initiated were either miste or epopte. Miste is where our word mysticism is derived. It is from the miste. The word miste literally means with eyes closed. The epopte were the seers. Now, many things have been speculated about the eyes closed. Some people said it was like the work that we do in prayer or in meditation where we have our eyes closed. Those are all speculations. The philosophers of the time believed that the eyes were closed like a baby kitten, that at first the eyes are closed and then by a process they open up and we begin to see. So the Mystae were called hearers of the truth. Because their eyes were closed, they could only hear about it in a hearsay manner. Whereas the epopte or epopte were seers, their eyes were opened and they could see. Now when we turn to John's Gospel is very different. John's Gospel is an auditory gospel. It begins with the Word, with the primordial Word that was before everything else that was. And therefore, in John's Gospel, to be a hearer of the truth is a much deeper, a much more profound thing than to be a mere seer of the truth. Again, we run into 2 types of personalities. There are personalities that see, and when they see, they get a feeling. And there are people who hear, and when they hear, they get a sense of truth. When we looked at Luke's Gospel proclaims itself right from the very outset to be for seers. And we saw yesterday especially that it is for people who feel. According to Max Heindel, the art that attunes us to the desire world is painting, because it is filled with light, and it is filled with images, and it is filled with color. St. John's Gospel is for hearers of truth, and it relates to the world of thought, because the character of the world of thought is the character of sound, and the art that is associated with bringing us into an awareness of the world of thought is music. It is, does this have the ring of truth? So when St. John's Gospel says it's for hearers of the truth, it means something very different than what the Eleusinian mysteries said about the hearers of the truth getting only hearsay before they could see. The fact that it is a hearer's gospel or an auditory gospel, and that it is related to truth, is carried out even into the physical world. In the physical world, there are numerous optical illusions because of familiarity. When we think we see something, we quit observing. And if we have an assumption of the way things are, which is what all optical illusions do, they give us an assumption, they shut off our discriminatory process. There are very few auditory illusions. Hearing is a very accurate perception. There are even, there are things that people use them for scavenger hunts. You know what scavenger hunts are? Where you get a clue to go here and a clue to go there. They do things with sound where they have speakers emanating sound, and only when you get to the right place can you hear that the sound converges, and that what is just basically noise coming out of speakers, when they converge at one point, you then hear a message. Some of these things get very, very clever, and this is what attunement is like. Our talk today is about attunement. It is putting ourselves in a place where we can experience the truth that may be surrounding us all the time, and by putting ourselves in touch with the truth, we can live it. From physics, we know that sound is very different than light. Light follows a transverse wave. It can be polarized. You can cut it off. That's not so with sound. Sound travels on a longitudinal wave. Sound is very direct. It goes back and forth, but pushes forward all the time. And it isn't in a wave that you can chop it off. It isn't like looking at the ocean. It's a much more direct, it's a much more penetrating kind of thing. And it is not in a curvy way, the way light is, which allows for so much distortion. Again, sound is the way of thought. We have in folklore a lot of things that bring this up. We say, this sounds true. Or we say somebody is of sound mind or body. Or we say this has a ring of truth. And someone who is capable of persuading, we call that a pitch man or a pitch person. So the whole idea of sound being associated with truth is a very common thing. What our ears hear is not the same as the word that St. John's Gospel is speaking of. What we are picking up is something several steps down the way. It is true that every realm and everything in every realm is a consequence of that ineffable word, but that word we can't hear with ears. That can be only apperceived by a direct experience in spirit. Only when we give our full attention to spirit and the source of spirit that is even behind the word, only then can we experience the word, and we can't even talk about it when we do, or we can talk about it or around it. Even physicists would agree that every plane or every state of reality is a pitch. They would bring out Planck's constant, and they would bring out radio telescopes and say things like that. But everything in every realm or every world is a matter of tone or of pitch. John again is speaking about something much more deep. So what we're going to do is something a little bit lighter than John, but it is going to go a little bit deeper than folk idiom, and it has to go beyond science because science only deals with the material world. So we're going to deal with mostly the Rosicrucian philosophy today. Tomorrow we will deal more with St. John's Gospel, and our objective is we're at the first part of the Rosicrucian motto. We're trying to reach a sane mind. The whole series of talks that we're going through is for a sane mind, a soft heart, and a sound body. So we're trying to get at sanity. We probably won't get there until tomorrow. That's what the Spirit always tells me. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll be sane. First of all, we have to do what in slang is said, getting on the same page. We want to be certain that we're talking about the same thing, and so we'll start with what we experience regularly, but it is not what we're really trying to get at. So to eliminate confusion, the mind is not the brain. The mind is not the brain. The brain is an organ in the dense body, the dense physical body. It's part of the nervous system. And the nervous system does relate to the world of thought, but it is not the world of thought. The brain is marvelous, and it's wondrous, and it's the most recently developed part of our physical bodies, but certainly the most complicated and the most delicate. It breaks easily, and it's very hard to restore. It is amazingly complex and astounding. The brain is not like a computer. A computer works linearly, switch after switch after switch, until you go through a series of switches and get somewhere. The brain does not work like that. The brain is circular. It comes back. There are many ways that you can arrive at the same synapse. You can arrive from different directions, and whatever direction that you come to that synapse at, you experience the thought in a different way. The brain is very mercurial. It gives variety. It gives you a variety of experiences, and another mercurial quality is alternatives, because brain cells do die, and usually they do not regenerate. You have to have alternative ways to get at the same thing. This means the more ways we can learn something, the same thing, the more likely we are to have an active and continuing thought life in our physical body. If we think about the same thing the same way all the time, we use the same train of neural synapses. And when we do that and they burn out, then we have no alternatives because we haven't developed them. So variety and looking at things in an alternative is a way to arriving at a sound body and a sane mind in a very simple way in the physical. The brain is exceedingly important to waking consciousness in the physical body. It is attuned to the mind, and it is a special vehicle of the mind, but it is not the mind. The relationship of the brain to the mind is very much like the relationship of the eye to light. There had to be light first for the eye to be able to realize it was there and to develop itself so that we could see through the light. In a similar way, there had to be thought, there had to be truth expressed through thought before the brain could develop. It's a matter because the brain is almost more like a sense organ than it is like a creative organ. The creative things are found more in the spiritual world. The perceptive things are found more in the material world. Speaking personally, I have a very unusual life. My life is almost entirely dedicated to my friends, and it has been throughout life. And one of the things that has been given to me is that I am the only friend to a large number of people. There are a lot of people that sit in their rooms and they can't communicate with anybody else but me. And some of them are very troubled people. And some of them are very damaged people. Some of them are psychologically damaged, usually the ones that were maltreated in their infancy and early childhood are the most damaged. But some of them actually have physical damage. And among them, I have 2 or 3 people that I am friend to that have brain damage. And working with a brain damaged person is fascinating. It's the most difficult thing you'd ever want to do, but it's fascinating. And one of the most difficult parts of working with a brain damaged person is determining what part is brain damage and what part is in the lower nature. A lot of this problem has to do with the structure of the brain itself. The brain is built and it's nourished and it's protected in such a way that the parts that are essential to the survival of the physical body are most protected. Whereas the parts that aren't essential to ongoing existence are the parts that die the easiest. So the regions of the brain that deal with morality, ethics, aesthetics, beautiful things, those are the things that usually go the first if there's brain damage. And so what is left is the part that is cunning and the part that is most close to the lower nature and that is most dear to the lower nature, so that almost any time that you see a brain damage, you also see a character degradation in that the lower nature takes over and it produces a most unsavory character. The difficult part is not that there's this damage and that there is the lower nature. It is a matter of being able to determine what is what. So if somebody has a stroke, or if somebody has Alzheimer's, or if somebody has a coma, the brain, the higher function of the brain will be lost, or it'll be lost in patchwork. It's a really funny thing. Some people can think ethically in some regions, but not so in other regions. It's a very, very hard thing. The thing that's difficult about it is that the lower nature forms a symbiosis with the condition. It isn't necessarily sinister. Somebody doesn't become evil, but all of the things that we dislike about ourselves. All of the petty things and all of the selfish things and all of those things become accentuated. But in a very clever way, because the lower self knows that there is an advantage to its condition with the brain damage. It's almost like fish that have evolved in a place where there is a lot of aquatic flora. The fish look almost like the water plants. In fact, some of them, in some of the coral reefs off of Australia, the fish are living, they look exactly like living plants, and you can't separate them. And so when you're trying to help somebody, or even get through to somebody to take care of themselves physically, you have to deal with, am I dealing with a damaged brain here, or am I dealing with a lower nature that has taken over and wants things its own way? It's very, very, if you're dealing with somebody that is flipped out or insane, you can understand what region of the spiritual worlds they're in, and you can work with that. But with brain damage, it's really, really difficult. What's even more difficult is that the spiritual being, the self, that it has to work through the brain damage, doesn't know it either. This is the thing about the position that we are in. Our temple service says that we will be known as we are known, that we will be able to step out of ourself and into the selfness of Christ, and from that point of view we will be able to see ourselves as Spirit sees us. But until then, as long as we're in our vehicles, we can't necessarily always see what the limitations are. So a brain-damaged person, I have another friend that is brain damaged that has had tumors removed. And the person is very bright. And in spirit, they can do things and they can think the thoughts in the brain, but the vocal part of the brain is damaged. And so the finding the words to say what needs to be said is very difficult. And so we're in that same position. When you work with a brain-damaged person, we see that this is where we are. In a way, we're flawed, we're imperfect, only we don't know what we're missing. We can't see how bad off we are. And this is why, this is one of the real values of being able to appeal to the Christ. Because when we appeal to the Christ, we get beyond ourselves. We don't have the blinding quality of ego. We don't have the limitation of being unevolved. Christ loves us whether we're evolved or unevolved, and gives us insight whether we're evolved or uninvolved. Evolved, I'm sorry. Now, so the Spirit uses the higher faculties of our brain for self-knowledge and self-expression. When the etheric brain is damaged and the etheric brain cannot properly interpenetrate the physical brain, there is a very difficult condition that is called epilepsy. In fact, we even find it a lot now in the animal kingdom. For example, the group spirit does not want dogs to mate with coyotes, because when dogs mate with coyotes, the etheric brain does not interpenetrate the physical brain. And as a result, the dog, take a German Shepherd, its brain, its etheric brain is much more interpenetrating into the physical brain. It's much more self-consciously aware. When you produce a hybrid, the etheric brain doesn't come in. And as a consequence, hybrids between German Shepherds and coyotes have progressive epilepsy. They have a seizure, and then they have another seizure, and pretty soon the seizures are getting stronger. Extremely intelligent pets that are trying to bring in the etheric brain even more so that they can become completely self-conscious, those dogs are also subject to epilepsy. Almost everybody here, at least half the people, know Eddie Anderson, don't you? Eddie Anderson had a very bright dog, an extremely bright dog, and it succumbed to epilepsy. The seizures just kept getting stronger and stronger. It was we all loved the dog so much, and it knew how to lap up more affection than anyone could imagine was possible. Yes?
Are these animals treatable by veterinarians like a human would be for epileptic?
You mean like with the latin sodium and phenobarbital? To some extent, but not quite as much.
Do they usually euthanize them then? Or?
Yes, they usually are euthanized. Or what Eddie did is there were medicines that would knock the dog out, because it's not the same as a human where you're trying to just harmonize the brain and calm it down a little bit. In the case of a dog, the etheric brain actually isn't even into physical, and then trying to bring it in is what produces the problem. And so what they do is just try to force it out altogether by the use of drugs. All right. But at any rate, even with a damaged brain, even when the etheric brain is part in and part out of the body, wondrous things can be done. Probably one of the greatest geniuses of literature in the last century, Fyodor Dostoevsky, was an epileptic. And as he left his body in epileptic seizures, he was spiritually advanced enough that he could put his consciousness for a moment into the etheric body. And when he was in the etheric body, he had these wondrous moments of deja vu. And sometimes an entire novel was conceived in the moment of passing out in an epileptic seizure. And on top of that, it really brought him compassion. Tolstoy tried to be the ultimate Christian. He preached celibacy, and his wife complained that she had to bring another child into the world every year. But Dostoevsky didn't preach anything. But because he had so many sins, he was inclined toward pedophilia. He was inclined toward compulsive gambling. He was an epileptic. He was inclined toward alcoholism. And he worked through all of these things, and he had a compassion that he really loved the soul of everyone, and really probably was the greater Christian of the two, though it's very hard to judge anyone. I don't want to do that. But at any rate, one can realize when you have a deja vu experience from epilepsy, or when you have a moment when you're leaving your body at night in sleep, you get a glimpse, and you can bring back wonders. You realize that the brain is as much of a transmitter as it is an organ of thought. The thought is done in the mind. Some of it is completed in the brain, but because of the limitations of the physical body, not very much. All one has to do, we talked about it earlier, is take a nap when you're not tired. At a time of the day when you would never take a nap, and you can put yourself into the reflecting ether. And in the reflecting ether, you'll see that you have all kinds of thoughts ramifying out there, and they are thoughts that relate to the thoughts that have come through the brain and into our physical consciousness. But I'm a great advocate of the nap. It's for me, it's a spiritual exercise. It's like Max Heindel says about the physical body when he's talking about Kundry in the Parsifal story. The physical body is always tired. I'm tired. And so I just love the nap. But we can see then that the brain is as much of a transmitter as it is an originator of thought. Even the thought that we do when we're in the body is different than the thought that we do when we're outside of the body. Our thinking, because of the brain and because of being in the physical body when we're thinking, is unlike any other thought in the cosmos. You can see this with the group spirits. Animals do not understand automobiles. And the group spirit that guides animals does not understand them. I live right near the shore of a lake, and there's a street that you can go right around the edge of the lake. And there are ducks out there. If I drive down the street with the car, the ducks don't really know what to do with the car. If I drive down the street with my bicycle, and the ducks can see me as a being and not just seeing this object that they don't understand, they know what to do. They know how to get out of the way. That's just one very small, very poor example, but there is example after example after example that the devices and the things that have been produced with the brain-mind consciousness are such that entities working, such as angels, working as group spirits, working through their charges in the material world, cannot deal with our brain-mind consciousness. It's a very limited kind of consciousness. So, this is evidence in another way of what Paul says, we are a peculiar people, in that we develop our thought, and that thought is very unique. Probably, it would be wise if we could learn how to do it. Our thought life would be much richer and much longer if we could do all of our thinking outside of the body and then just use the body as a transmitter and bring it through once in a while. Then we wouldn't damage so many brain cells, and we could have a much richer and much longer thought life. I haven't figured quite how to do that. There are some people that claim to have done that, but that's a little bit beyond me in my capacity anyway. By looking at the brain and trying to understand its relationship to the etheric brain and to the mind, by looking at it in a damaged way, we have learned a few things. Now let's switch gears and try to look at the mind in a different way, more what it is. In a very sophomoric way, we could give a simplistic definition of the mind and say, the mind is our vehicle for perceiving and transmitting truth. That's a true statement. However, like most simple statements, it's very broad and it's very general. And it's also very safe. When you make statements like that, you can make them all day long, and they're unassailable statements. Nobody can argue with it. Anybody can sound like a master. You can just say all sorts of platitudes that are simple, and they're truisms. But if we want to do something that we can use and that we have a really working understanding, we have to be a little bit more accurate. When we try to answer these very big, broad things like, what does it mean when you say the mind is our vehicle for creating and expressing or creating and perceiving truth, we run into all kinds of problems. Because the mind is mercurial in nature. And it comes up with as many questions as it does answers. Each question spawns more questions, or each answer spawns more questions. This is all right if we want to take the time and work with it, because questioning is our primary work. To state again, all of the archetypes created in the world of thought are vacuous. They are empty. And in the resonance of that emptiness, like the resonance of a flute, they draw to them the stuff of the world, of the various worlds, and they consolidate what we would call phenomenal reality. The attitude of a vacuum, psychologically understood, is the attitude of asking a question. When you ask a question, you're making yourself empty. You're saying, what does this mean? What is the truth? And the deeper the question you can ask, and the more sincere you can ask that question, the best question is a prayer. God, I please need help. Please help this person. When you do something like that, you're producing a profound vacuum which will be filled generously with the Spirit. So when we ask these kinds of questions and get answers, we're going to have many, many more questions. The first question that comes to mind with the previous answer is, what is the truth? And so we're going to do that sophomoric thing and try to look at what the truth is. For a phenomenologist, the answer to what the truth is would be the facts. The phenomena themselves are the truth. Or as you've often heard it, the facts speak for themselves. For a deist or a theist, the answer would be, God is the truth. Everything else is part of God. And there are a couple of interesting things about this, because these are, again, big platitudes. They're big truisms. If you take these two poles, the phenomenologist and the theist, those two extremes, if you take them in absolute, both of them are true. Both of them are completely true, but they're also as unassailable and they're as useless as the original platitude. Obviously, the phenomenologist is looking at the material end of the spectrum, and the theist is looking at the more spiritual end of the spectrum. If we can realize by looking in both directions, as the Rosicrucian philosophy does, the Rosicrucian philosophy is a monistic philosophy with an internal dualism. That is to say, it is all one, but to understand that all one, there is an internal differentiation by the divine in what is called the spirit-matter pole, where going one direction, things are more material, going the other direction, things are more spiritual. If you go back and forth, it's almost like a compound curve in music, where a line is developed and then it's dropped, and then you start another line at another octave, and then you go back to the first one. If you do it fast enough, you get the idea that there are two lines going at the same time. If you look closely enough and swiftly enough at both theism and phenomenalism, or materialism and spiritualism, you can get an idea of the whole. And that's basically what all philosophy tries to do, because the whole in itself is completely ineffable. The oneness is so one that there's nothing that can be said about it. And that's why things that try to approach that are unassailable. They are truisms. So if we ask these questions in absolute, we won't get absolute answers, but each time we ask the question, we get a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more information. I've been asking some of the same questions for over 30 years, and each time I ask the question, I get a different and deeper understanding. For the time, let's look in the more limited and relative direction. Let's look in the phenomenal direction. Tomorrow we'll look in the lofty spiritual direction, and we'll look into St. John's Gospel, and we'll try to see how the ultimate of a sane mind is attained to. If we assume that the truth is in the facts, that puts us really in a pickle. If we assume that phenomenal reality is the truth, we don't know for sure whether we know what the truth is. That's where we're going. That's exactly where we're going. What we experience most likely is a facsimile of truth and not reality. Let's just look at it. Let's begin with the dense physical world, because that's where most of our experience is. Our vehicle or the media that we have for the external world are our senses. As we said in a previous talk, since each of the senses gives us a different part of reality, we realize that we have a broken and incomplete view of reality. If we smell a flower, we have one characteristic of reality. If we see the flower, we have another characteristic of reality. If we take the petal and in our hands and feel it, we understand another characteristic of reality. Each is incomplete. And even putting all of the senses together, we have something that's broken up, something like a jigsaw puzzle. And so the consciousness that we have of the external world is broken, if not totally incomplete. Now, suppose that we accept that all of the senses put together give us a total picture of reality, even though that picture is cut up like a jigsaw puzzle. Suppose we look with the senses, suppose we look at something with our eye. What happens is the rods and the cones pick up light, and there is an electrochemical interaction where it gets turned into a neural impulse, and that neural impulse registers in our brain. And just suppose for a moment, I can't agree totally, but just suppose for a moment that the spirit is awake in the brain. I told you this was going to be tedious. What is the spirit experiencing? It's not experiencing reality. It's experiencing a neural phenomenon. It is a neural activity and not the reality itself. Now, even if we're touching things, we're not experiencing reality itself. Everything is in the brain. Now, if we try to follow this along the spiritual matter pole, a spirit matter pole, and use the Rosicrucian philosophy, we'll say that the perception is not complete until it is carried into the live light ether. Some philosophers, even some mystical philosophers, believe that our entire experience is in the light ether, and that everything else is illusion, and that we are experts in the life ether, and that in the light ether, and that in a way we never really fell. What fell was the illusion that we are in the physical world. This is really tedious. We could carry it a step further back. We could say that what the truth knower, what the spirit knows, is not even the light ether. It is the impressions that are formed in the region of impressionability in our desire bodies. Because anything we look at, we have an impression of. And that is the reality, is what we feel about it. What our emotional take is on reality, even if we're taking in data from a device, like a photomultiplier tube that is counting individual photons. If we're doing that, when the data is brought to the level that the spirit is seeing it through the desire body. What it is relating to is an impression. And if you work with scientists, you'll find that this is true. You'll find that a scientist will look over data, and not necessarily by a mental analysis or by an intuitive sense, they'll have a feeling for data. You know what I'm trying to say? Now, if you follow this back even further, you could say that where one is experiencing is not even in the desire body. What one is experiencing is the archetype, the thought that is behind the thing that you're experiencing, and that the spirit is directly reflecting off of the experience of the archetype, and that reality is in the mind and in your mind only. And there are a lot of philosophers that have thought that way. All right, I don't want to get too tedious about all of this. Somewhere along the line, when we follow this kind of thinking, the spirit balks. I've seen it balking in people sitting here all along, saying, I know very well that I'm seeing reality. When I walked into a lamppost earlier in life, I was sure I was experiencing reality, and that it wasn't just something in the light ether, or it wasn't just a neural impulse in my brain. Intuitively, we know that we're experiencing reality. But we also know that our experience of reality is twofold. On one hand, it's tremendously frustrating because we realize, especially when you get old, your eyes get darker and you got more floaters, your ears aren't as keen as they used to be. You realize that our take on material reality is very imperfect. That's the one feeling. At the other hand, the feeling is, wow, it's beautiful. It is a privilege to even the material world. It is, you could even call it -2 heaven. I don't care. It's, you know what I'm trying to say? It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Now, we have both of these experiences. Our mind, our thoughts tell us at every step of the way that we are not seeing external reality in the material world directly. What we are seeing is something that has gone through a chain of causes, vertical chain of causes through different bodies, and that along the way a lot has been lost, and the tools for picking things up, even though as perfect as they are still not picking up everything. The senses are pretty perfect. The sense of smell, you can smell several parts per billion of something. That means if there is a flower scent, that for every molecule for every billion molecules, if there are 2 or 3 molecules of the flower scent, you will pick it up. It's that sensitive. And if you're on a desert mountain looking out, you can see a match struck at about 5 miles. That's pretty sensitive. So we have both of these feelings. One is the intuitive feeling. One is the phenomenal feeling about experiencing reality. Some people carry it so far. There are philosophies that completely eliminate the intuitive and the entire inner chain of consciousness. This is what's taught in our colleges and universities, that all of our consciousness is the consequence of the interaction of chemicals with each other. that everything we're experiencing is that. That's phenomenalism taken to an extreme. The weakness of the phenomenalistic argument, there are several weaknesses. If somebody tries to tell you that it's just a matter of atoms interacting with each other, you can say, well, if you had had a different breakfast, you'd have a different argument. Because your argument is based completely on chemistry. I at least believe that there's a universal truth that goes through everything, and that the same truth that is in me is in you, and that when we come to a truth together, it is the same truth. We're on the same page. But the absurdity of the materialistic argument is that matter can do something greater than itself. It's a complete bottom-up approach, such that matter blindly, by random chance and the forces of nature interacting, can come together and produce something that is an illusion of consciousness, and that illusion of consciousness can change matter. You know, when you take matter into like an atomic bomb, and you change it from matter into energy. The scientists believe that that is just matter doing that. Of course, they're all egoists, so they're contradictory in their life to what they believe. But this is not, I'm not trying to just be talking in a sophomoric way about the metaphysics of the planes. Because in the refutation of what the materialistic phenomenalist says, we get to a very, very important point. We have proof of the fact that our senses, even with the complicated chain, even with the great limitations of our sense organs, that our experience of reality is true because we can intuitively conclude in the mind that this is the truth of things, and we can change it. The fact that we can change the experience around us is a very important fact. It means that through the mind, we, the truth knowers, we, the spiritual beings, can create. We can modify. We can change. If we know the truth, we are creative free agents. And as creative free agents, we can make things different from what they are. That's what an atomic bomb means. It means that we can take the physical world and bring it back into the etheric and turn it completely into energy. This means that all of the other realms, if they aren't completely created by our mind, they're subject to our mind. This is extremely important because it means that thought is part of all the other phenomenal realms. Now, if you look at this, this is an extremely crude or unsophisticated proof of the fact that the world of thought interpenetrates all of the other worlds. It's away from our experience. We don't have to have a clairvoyance in the world of thought to know that the thoughts do interpenetrate all of the worlds, and that we as thinkers, we as spiritual egos, we as spiritual selves can, through the power of thought, work interpenetratingly and change the world around us. Now, it's also true that our thought is weak, and it's a long time before we'll be able to take thought and change the Rocky Mountains, but it is a creative power that is available to us now. Sometimes, if we work collectively, if not alone singularly, we can bring new, completely new creative stuff from the life spirit down to heal. We can, as Christ, be forgivers of sins by bringing something that makes it all new. That's a really important thing. We can change things. We can change simple things. We can change attitudes around us. We can change the way people look at the world and reality around us. The word occult means hidden or obscured. Max Heindel has told us and has admonished us to participate in this kind of activity with our minds and to do it freely and regularly. Max Heindel called this occult service. By working quietly and unostentatiously in our own closets, we can do a lot to change the mind of humanity, to change the psychic background of the world. One skilled thinker is worth 1,000,000 people who don't know how to think. We are practicing every day the process of concentration. We don't have to be geniuses. We don't have to be super intelligent. All we have to do is to use the mind that we have right now to concentrate. If we produce true thoughts, if we produce thoughts that are beneficial and helpful to humanity, they will radiate out into the world much more effectively than television. This is a big part of our work. We are called to the thinking path. And that means for us, we are to think. The Web of Destiny tells us that prayer is a very special and a very deep kind of thinking, so that a large part of our life should be spent thinking. This is what we give to the world. The minerals give stable form. The plants give us ether. The animals give us desire. The humans give to the world thought. One of the very best features about occult service in the form of thinking, especially prayerful thinking, is that you can do it without your big fat ego getting in the way. In fact, it's impossible to concentrate. It's impossible to really get at the spiritual information you want if egoistic things are distracting you. You cannot look God in the face if you're making much of yourself. You have to be able to set self aside and be God-oriented in order to do this. Now, it requires sacrifice. Max Heindel says that we get somewhere by work and by prayer. From as far as I can see it, prayer is work. It's very hard work. It takes a long time to learn how to think and to learn how to think the highest of spiritual thoughts. I can remember a time that for about 30 years ago, for me to sit down for 5 minutes and concentrate and think was a difficult thing. But you stay with it and you keep, it's a really engaging thing. If you get into it, you really love it. And you can get sometimes where I can sit at it for 5 hours. It's not all good. It's certainly not all good. But you work at it, and out of that 5 hours, you get a few minutes that are good, and sometimes you get a few seconds that are really good. What else are we going to do with our lives? I can't think of anything better to do with my life, because if you're thinking those kinds of thoughts, you get treated along the way to the most wonderful stuff that you can, that is possible for a human being to experience. That if we think about lofty things and if we focus them into the world, we're treated. We have floating through us We are a conduit for something that cleans us in a way that is unbelievable. It's quite something. In fact, I believe that the world is suffering right now as we're moving from the age of Pisces toward the age of Pisces, toward the age of Aquarius. We are down-tuning the 12th house, and we're going to the 11th house, and we're doing it too dangerously fast. I believe that there are quotas. The quotas may change, but I believe that there are quotas for each house. And right now, the quota for the 12th house is such that people are leaving the monasteries in droves, and instead we're putting them all into prisons. And that if more people spent more time, maybe not necessarily in a monastery, but if more people spent more time in their own individual 12th house doing this kind of thought, we could significantly reduce a lot of the confusion and disturbance that is in the psychic atmosphere. A lot of people don't know what to do. You see a cat that's frightened, and it'll run this way and that. I've seen cats run right into traffic when there's confusion going on. And there's a lot of that in the inner worlds right now. And this is something that we can do. This is constructive service of the very best type. If we put ourselves into controlled, sacrificing, destructive service, we're much more likely to have a sane mind than if we're lazy and self-indulgent and trying to please ourselves. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get to a sane mind. This is going awfully slow. You're gonna want grace back sooner than later. All right. We're down to not too far. We'll be out of here by 11. As we're talking about it now, this is a way that the mind is used to express truth rather than to perceive truth. So let's go back to our objective, which is to look at relative truth along the matter end of the spirit-matter pole and to look at it more in perception. In the Rosicrucian exercises, side by side, we utilize observation and discrimination with concentration. Both are on the same plane. The Rosicrucian philosophy tells us that the world of thought is a world of pitch or frequency. This means that the stuff of the world of thought and the mind is a thought itself. There's an archetype of the mind, and that archetype of the mind is a thought. The very deep mystery, it's the last one that we learn. And it is a matter of pitch. Each of us, in the deep spiritual sense of the mind, is a being of tones. The Rosicrucian philosophy tells us in very ingenious ways that every object, every emotion has a keynote that relates to it. The creation and the destruction and the continuance of any object is held together by a keynote, very much like in the material world an arch is held together by a keystone. You pull the keystone out, the arch falls. That's the way it works. Now, when it's talked about how things are communicated to us esoterically in the Rosicrucian teaching, a wonderful physics principle is brought out and brought on in a higher level. It is the principle of resonance, resonant attunement. That is to say that if we were being initiated so that we were to relive our experience in the Saturn period and in the Polarian epoch, the elder brother that would initiate us would not project that into us. The elder brother would focus on that cosmic truth, bearing the student in mind, but would focus on that truth. When the student who loved that brother, it's all done by love, were loved into initiation by the Christ love, and it is our love for the Christ that initiates us. When we love the teacher, we raise our consciousness to a level where we resonate exactly with the teacher. And when we resonate with the teacher, we experience the same truth that the teacher is focusing on. This is the way things are accomplished in the spiritual world, is by resonance. It's called sympathetic vibration. If you hit a note on the piano and keep on hitting it, anything that has that key note will eventually begin to vibrate to that note. So with the resonant frequency, the reason for the resonant frequency in the spiritual worlds is because it's ethical. Yesterday we talked about once we asserted ourselves self-consciously, the gods could no longer lead us around by the nose. We had said we are divine beings in our own right. We're expressing our creative free will. And when we express our creative free will, every one of the divine beings respects the God in us. This is the way, if we want to live spiritual lives, we have to respect the God in each and every individual that we meet. If we don't do that, we cannot progress spiritually, we cannot work spiritually unless we respect. This is why everything in the cosmos is done by resonant frequencies, by sympathetic vibrations. Nothing is forced on any other being, even if it were possible to do so. It's possible to look at somebody's etheric aura, or even just hold them in mind and project the thought to them, but that is unethical. You're forcing something down their throat. That's black magic. And if we want to be as God is, because what we love, we live like. And if we want to be as God and the gods are, we do something by resonant frequencies. All of the different planes are called emanations, because there is the quality of impingement. Even when we open up clairvoyance and connect the pituitary and pineal gland, it isn't a direct connection. It is an impingent resonant frequency. Nothing is forced. So this is a really important thing. This is the way we come to know with full experience anything and everything. This is active. This is controlled. If we bring ourselves to a pitch, and that pitch matches something else, Max Heindel tells us very clearly that the keys to the kingdom are musical keys, and that by raising ourselves to a pitch and living it, when we live in a certain pitch, we open up to that realm. That is the reality of it. So, the more we develop the quality of attunement in our mind, when we concentrate on something and resonate to it, we become true. Now, one of the difficulties about all of this is like 6 talks strung together. It was supposed to be in an hour, but we're going to get it in. But we'll be done by 11 o'clock, I think. We're down to the last page and a half of notes here, about 1 page left. If we do this attunement, we run into the problem of subjectivity. Since the times of the Greek mystery school, we have been admonished to know thyself. In retrospection, it's very hard to step out of ourselves, but when we can do so and look with the view to be known as we are known, to be seen as we are seen by the light and truth of Christ, we develop an objectivity. We do not have a personal subjectivity. It is extremely important that we know ourselves so that we can attune ourselves to the spiritual potential that was intended when our archetype was created. if we like the way we are too much and we don't see ourselves as someone else sees us, we're likely to get stuck into the stylized, personal, subjective character. And if people who like our style will get along with us. But if we want to love and be loved as Christ loves, so that there is universal love or altruism, as when Christ says in St. John's Gospel, "Ye are my friends." And then later on, "Greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friends." If we want to have that kind of consciousness, we have to know ourselves, and we have to know ourselves very objectively. No personal, like, well, this is my sweet little way. That just doesn't work. Because if we don't know ourselves and we develop sensitivity, we don't know who is who. If you read somebody else's thoughts and you don't know your own pitch of thinking, you won't be able to differentiate what is what. And if you develop sensitivity without this kind of over-knowing, the spiritual knowing, what you will have will be utterly worthless. Sometimes you'll hit, sometimes you won't. So it's exceedingly important that we know ourselves in a clear way. When we do rise beyond ourselves, we develop objectivity of spirit. And when we have an objectivity of spirit, we aren't caught by sentimentality, or we are not sloppy or anything like this. We become like God. And the Bible tells us very clearly, God is not a respecter of persons. Loves the Spirit, but not a respecter of persons. If we don't do these things, we can see, as we saw in the earlier, more tedious part of this talk, that we can get lost in all kinds of complexities, all kinds of chains of causes, both horizontal and vertical, and we can be a prisoner of our own mind. The word amazement comes from maze. And if we do not get beyond our mind, it becomes a maze, and we are lost in ourselves. It's possible, and it is even our duty, to have our own point of view. Each of us is unique. Each of us has a different experience. And each of us should continue being a standout, unique individual, but not to personalize it. If we do that, we fog it or we glaze it, and it's a very personal way. It's not the way. There is a great problem with our imperfection and with our subjectivism, that we sometimes don't know what the truth is. Fortunately, as thinking beings in the world, we are not alone and we are not unique. There is an example that every now and then you can go to a primitive place where people don't know about the rest of the world, and they tune their instruments differently from the rest of the world. You cannot know how to tune an instrument. You can sit in your room and have your little guitar, and you can play it, and you can get some weird, interesting sounds, but you're out of tune. You can never play with, You can never play with anybody else because you're not in the same world as they are. In the cosmos, just as we have a standard pitch with pitchforks or the little things that you use for tuning, in the cosmos there are universal archetypes fought by the perfect thinkers that created the cosmos, so that in order to deal with the dilemma or the problem of personal subjectivism, or to deal with the problem of imperfect thinking and not being able to resonate correctly, we always have the cosmic archetypes. All we need to do is know this. We don't have to know exactly what they are. All we need to know is that there are cosmic standards of truth. And the more we attune our mind, we sense them. We know that there's something, that our thoughts can be more accurate. We know that we can be more true to reality, external and internal. And if we once realize, if we, the spirits, focus our attention on the divine archetypes and attune ourselves to them, we will have sane minds, because we will then no longer be personally subjective. We will be attuning ourselves to the divine intent, the intent that God has in mind. And if we wish to have a sane mind, attunement in this sense is also true. There's a whole science of physics that's dedicated to harmonics and acoustics and things like that, but we don't need to go into that. All we need to know, the Rosicrucian philosophy is for thoughtful people, but we don't have to be super intellects. All we have to do is know a few simple facts, that those realities are there, and then we can do it ourselves. We can apply ourselves directly to reality. Tomorrow, what we will try to do is look at a sane mind in a much more spiritual and much less tedious way. But for now, let's try to attune ourselves to the archetype of the Rosicrucian philosophy. And let's try to do that attunement through the Rosicrucian prayer. But once again, I'm going to go back to something. It's good grammar that I noticed that some people we do not pluralize the S on meditations. Even though we're pluralizing and saying we, and we're saying that the words of our mouths are plural, we want one meditation. We are one spirit. So when we come to the word meditation, we don't say we don't pluralize that. It's bad grammar, and it's not what we're wanting to do spiritually. So let's go. I'm a stickler in some ways for grammar, even though I have very bad grammar. Grammar is a form of logic, I guess. And since we're talking about archetypes, we should be logical. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. If somebody wants to ask a question for a minute or two about the talk, or everybody's pretty, yeah.
Yes. Did you say that in certain isolated cultures, the people tune their musical instruments differently than we do?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. On the 100th monkey, there were monkeys on one island. They had no communication with monkeys on the other island. Did the same thing. So are we talking monkey mentality opposed to human mentality?
The monkeys have the benefit of a common group spirit that is not limited by space. Humans can get off and do their own thing.
Ego.
Yeah, I can give you an example. A few years ago, there was a folk musician that was raised all alone by himself out in the mountains somewhere, and he came to civilization. And he did have a guitar, but he didn't tune it like anybody else did, and everybody thought he was a phenomenon. He could do wondrous things with the guitar, but he had his own tuning, and it wasn't like the rest of the world. He could be a solo player only. He could not adjust to other people until he was using the same sense of tone as everyone else. I would imagine that somebody that had worked that much on himself could easily adjust. But as human beings, we do have, more than the animals, the ability to get in our own little world. In fact, you find that as a defense. That is what lots of forms of mental illness are. It is a lack of strength to participate psychically with the rest of humanity, and it's so much easier to say the rest of humanity is against me and to go inside of myself and feel protected in my own consciousness. We can do that, and to some extent, we all do that, and that's a shame for us. Good. All right. We'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.